My name is Claire Hollowell. I'm 32 years old now, but the memories I'm about to share feel as raw and present as if they happened yesterday, etched into the core of who I became. I am the second of 4 children in a family that mastered the art of smiling through emotional neglect, where love was doled out in gold-wrapped packages labeled with someone else's name. If you're imagining a warm household with laughter echoing through sunlit kitchens, let me stop you there. My childhood was quiet in all the wrong places, except when James was around. Then, suddenly, everyone had something to say. From the moment I could form conscious thought, it was clear to me that James, my older brother by 2 years, wasn't just the firstborn. He was the golden son. He was spoken of like a prophecy waiting to unfold. That boy's going to take over the business someday, my father used to say at dinner, often while ruffling James's hair in a way he never once did with mine. If I dared ask a question, no matter how thoughtful or curious, my father would frown like I'd interrupted a sermon and respond with, "Don't talk back, Claire. Let James finish." I was 7 the first time I learned that in our house, silence was more expected than speech, at least from me. There was one moment I revisit more than I'd like to admit. I must have been 9. James's 10th birthday was approaching, and our backyard transformed into what looked like a scene out of a suburban fairy tale. It was all custom-built lumber and swinging ropes, an elaborate treehouse complete with a trapdoor, pulley system, and an actual nameplate that read, "James's Fortress." I remember asking shyly if we could do something similar for my birthday in the fall, even something small. My father looked at me with thinly veiled impatience and said, "You already have your bike, don't you?" The bike had been Beth's before me. The paint chipped, the handlebars rusted. I asked for new handles, maybe a bell. He muttered, "Maybe next year," and walked away. That moment burned itself into my bones, not because of the disappointment, but because of how routine it felt. It wasn't a break in a pattern. It was the pattern. My mother, Margaret, wasn't cruel. She was peaceful. That was her role. She tried to keep the peace in a way that meant never truly hearing me. When I approached her quietly that evening and said I felt left out, she didn't hug me or look surprised. She just gave a tight smile and said, "I know it's hard sometimes being the middle child. You have to be patient, honey." Patience. That was the answer to everything. Why James got the last slice of pie, why I had to miss dance practice to help Lily with her homework, why my report card with straight A's was met with a distracted, "Good job, sweetie," while James's B+ in math earned a full steak dinner and one of Dad's rare, proud shoulder claps. By the time I was 12, I had quietly assumed the role no one assigned but everyone accepted. I became the helper, the fixer, the one who didn't make waves. I helped Lily and Beth with homework while my parents decompressed from work. I cleaned the dinner table without being asked. I kept my head down, stayed out of trouble, and poured myself into school. I won spelling bees, got perfect marks in science, and once wrote a short story that my teacher submitted to a state competition. I left the certificate on the kitchen counter. No one ever mentioned it. When I was 13, I overheard something I wasn't supposed to. I was walking down the hall on a Saturday morning when I heard my father talking to someone on the phone in his office. His door cracked open just an inch. I wasn't eavesdropping intentionally. I was heading to the laundry room. But when I heard my name, I froze. "James is the only one with real potential," my father said, his voice low and assured. "The rest are just fillers. You know how it is with girls. Lily's soft, Beth's a dreamer, and Claire, well, she's the quiet one. Useful around the house, but not much else." I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I stood there with a laundry basket pressing into my hip and felt my heart curl in on itself like burnt paper. Fillers. I was a placeholder in my own family. Something to be worked around. Not loved for who I was, but appreciated for what I could do to keep things running smoothly. There was no warmth in that appreciation, just a resigned sort of utility, like how you'd thank a dishwasher for being reliable. I never told anyone what I heard that day. What would have been the point? If I told Mom, she would have patted my hand and told me I misheard, that I was too sensitive. If I told James, he'd shrug and say, "You're being dramatic." And Lily and Beth, they were too young. Too sweet and still unspoiled by the quiet hierarchy that ruled our home like a ghost in the walls. So I pushed it down. And I kept pushing things down. Like the time in 8th grade when I made the honor roll again, and no one came to the school ceremony because James had a soccer scrimmage. Like the time Beth cried all night because of a fever, and I stayed up holding her hand while my parents slept through it, and no one remembered to say thank you the next day. Like every moment that built this quiet rage inside me, not hot, not sharp, but dull and persistent like water wearing down stone. I didn't act out. I didn't rebel. I didn't scream or throw things or beg for attention. Instead, I became what they wanted. Efficient. Polite. Predictable. I handed out snacks to Lily and Beth after school. I tutored James in chemistry, even though he never said thank you. I earned praise from teachers, glowing remarks on report cards, even a recommendation letter for a prestigious summer program. But when I told my parents, my father barely looked up from his newspaper. "Sounds expensive," he said. "Is it even worth it?" By high school, I had mastered the art of invisibility. And I wore it like a shield. But beneath the surface, a question gnawed at me constantly, like an itch I couldn't reach. What did I do wrong? What did I miss in my design that made me so easy to overlook? Was I too quiet? Too plain? Too responsible? Why did being good never seem to be enough? Why did love in our family feel so conditional? I never asked these questions out loud. I barely even admitted them to myself. But they lived in me, shaping every decision I made. I never dated anyone too flashy. I never tried out for school plays, though I wanted to. I stuck to safe, productive paths that wouldn't disrupt the family rhythm. Paths that would keep me useful, needed, if not loved. Looking back now, I can see the foundation that betrayal needed to thrive. It was laid in quiet moments, in hand-me-down birthdays, in treehouses I wasn't allowed to climb. It was built from silences louder than screams and smiles stretched too thin to be sincere. I didn't know it then, but all of it, the neglect, the favoritism, the passive complicity, was preparing me. Because when the real betrayal finally came years later, I didn't just recognize it. I had already lived it. And this time, I wouldn't stay silent. If my childhood was built on a quiet ache for recognition, then my young adulthood was shaped by the crushing realization that some doors weren't just closed, they were sealed shut, locked from the inside, and guarded by the people who were supposed to love me the most. When I turned 18, I wanted two things with a kind of desperation that ached in my bones: a chance to study something I loved and a room of my own in a city that didn't know my name. I had narrowed it down to two options: either art therapy, which combined my sketchbook obsession with the human complexity I craved to understand, or psychology, which fascinated me not just because of what it explained about others, but because I was still trying to decode my own family's emotional topography. I sat at the kitchen table one evening with brochures and course catalogs fanned out like tarot cards, hoping for a future that didn't look like a carbon copy of the present. My mother was folding laundry nearby while my father skimmed through a contractor invoice, his reading glasses sliding down his nose in that permanent scowl he reserved for spreadsheets and me. "I need a cosigner," I said, trying to keep my voice even, trying not to sound too eager, too naive, too anything that might trigger one of his dismissive smirks. He didn't even look up. "For what?" "For school," I said. "I got accepted to Ridley. It's not Ivy League, but they have a great psych program." Finally, he lifted his head. He stared at me like I'd just asked for a trip to the moon, shaking his head with a chuckle that was colder than most silences. "Psychology," he repeated, drawing the word out like it tasted rotten. "You'll just get married anyway. Why waste the money?" I glanced at my mother for backup, but she was too busy smoothing towels into perfect rectangles, the kind of domestic precision that had defined her entire adult life. "It's just not practical," she mumbled, as if that made it better, as if practicality was ever applied evenly in our household. James had left for college that same year with 2 brand new suitcases, a MacBook, and a fully covered tuition package courtesy of our parents' joint efforts and a special savings account that I had been told didn't exist when I first asked about college. He was going to Hawthorne Business School in Connecticut, far enough to be free, but close enough to keep orbiting our parents' pride like the chosen celestial body he'd always been. By contrast, I enrolled in community college. I worked a morning shift at a bakery and an evening shift at a hotel front desk. I took classes at night, commuting by bus and occasionally begging Beth for rides when she was free. There were no send-offs or care packages, no visits or congratulatory texts. My father once told me, "You're doing the responsible thing," but it was said with the same tone someone might use to praise someone for unclogging a toilet without complaint. I kept going, one foot in front of the other, collecting credits like puzzle pieces to a picture no one else cared to see. But the worst blow came the following spring, on a rainy Tuesday that still lives in my chest like a permanent bruise. I was in the den, helping Lily with a school project when Beth came barreling in with a handful of envelopes. "Look what I found in Dad's filing cabinet," she said, tossing them onto the coffee table like confetti. There were 4 envelopes, each with one of our names written in my mother's meticulous cursive: James, Claire, Lily, and Beth. Inside each envelope was a ledger printout from a bank account I didn't recognize, labeled Educational Reserve Trust, Hollowell Children. My heart pounded as I scanned the numbers. James's account balance was marked as $0.00, full disbursement completed. Mine showed a balance of $32.17. Lily's and Beth's still had a few thousand. "What is this?" I whispered. Beth shrugged. "Dad was looking for warranty papers. I saw these and figured they were old stuff." "Guess not." The next day, I confronted my mother. She looked like I'd accused her of murder. "Claire, your father will explain. James needed to take a semester abroad. It was important for his career. You weren't even using yours." I blinked. "So he emptied it? My college fund? That's what this is?" "He needed it more," she said, and those words felt like a final nail in the coffin where my dreams had been gently buried under years of polite neglect. That was the first time I felt something shift inside me. Something brittle and sharp begin to grow in the cracks. I didn't yell. I didn't throw anything. But I began to keep records. Quietly. Meticulously. If they were going to treat me like I was invisible, then they wouldn't see me coming either. In my early 20s, life took one of those sharp turns that leaves tire marks across your dignity. I lost my job after the hotel chain cut costs, and the guy I'd been dating for a year ghosted me within 2 weeks. With no apartment, no job, and no money, I dragged myself back home like a stray dog that had lost the scent of freedom. They didn't exactly roll out the red carpet. I was assigned to the basement, unfinished, slightly musty, filled with old holiday boxes and a broken futon that creaked with every exhale. James had recently started working with Dad, managing one of the company's new construction contracts, and suddenly our house became a cathedral in his honor. Every evening at dinner, the table conversation revolved around James's meetings, James's forecasts, James's vision for the future. If I offered a suggestion, it was either ignored or waved off. My father's favorite phrase became, "Your brother knows best." Eventually, out of sheer financial necessity, I accepted a part-time admin job at the family construction business. I worked the front desk, sorted invoices, scheduled client calls, and processed expense reports. I also made coffee, picked up lunch orders, and stayed late cleaning up behind everyone. Tasks that weren't in my job description but became expected anyway. James became my de facto boss, and he wielded that title like a medieval sword. He criticized everything I did, from the font I used in emails to the way I organized the supply closet. Once, during a meeting, he joked, "Don't worry, Claire won't mess this up. She knows she's replaceable." Everyone laughed. I smiled tightly and wrote it down. That night, I emailed myself the exact phrasing with a timestamp. Because I was done pretending. Done swallowing indignities with a polite nod. I wasn't ready to fight yet, not openly, but I was taking inventory. Then came the house. James announced at Sunday dinner, with all the theatricality of a royal proclamation, that he was buying the house next door. "It'll be great," he said, flashing that toothy grin our father adored. Close enough to check in on Mom and Dad, but with my own space. Our parents were over the moon. Dad slapped him on the back. Mom started planning which curtains to buy. Lily and Beth clapped like it was a game show prize. Later that week, I was doing payroll reconciliations when I saw something strange in the accounts, a large withdrawal from the Hollowell Family Trust. It had a notation, property acquisition, residence adjacency, beneficiary James Hollowell. I stared at the screen for a full 5 minutes. The trust. That wasn't James's money. It was technically shared among all of us, me, Lily, Beth, and him. He had bought the house with family money and called it his. Just like he had emptied the education fund and claimed it was necessary. Just like every opportunity one had lost had somehow turned into a stepping stone for him. I printed the record. I didn't confront anyone, not yet. But I made a folder. I labeled it things they'll deny later. Because one day, I wouldn't just walk away quietly. One day, they were going to see me, not the helper, not the placeholder, not the quiet one. Just me. And they were going to wish they had paid attention sooner. Sometimes, the most painful part isn't being forgotten. It's realizing you were never remembered to begin with. I was 33 the day James finally said out loud what I had always suspected he believed. It was a Tuesday, humid and stifling, the kind of weather that makes even breathing feel like effort. We were in the office conference room, the fluorescent lights flickering slightly as if they, too, were exhausted by the weight of everything unsaid in that space. I had just finished my fourth 12-hour workday of the week. My inbox was a disaster, and James had, once again, handed me an impossible deadline he hadn't even attempted to manage himself. I had reached my limit. "James, I can't keep picking up your slack," I said quietly, my voice more tired than angry. "This is my 5th late night this week. You've barely been in the office." He looked up from his phone slowly, like a king granting an audience, his expression one of amused disbelief. "My slack," he repeated, laughing as if I'd told him a joke. "Claire, this whole business is mine. You're just here because no one else would hire you." I stood there, frozen. I'd been running payroll, organizing client reports, doing our licensing renewals. He cut me off with a wave. "Gratitude isn't your strong suit, is it? You act like we owe you something just because you didn't completely waste your life." That was when it came. The sentence that would split everything down the middle. "You've always been a burden, Claire," he said, voice flat and final, like he was stating a mathematical fact. "Ungrateful and exhausting. We've just been too polite to say it before." My ears rang. For a moment, I genuinely thought I might pass out. Not from the words themselves, but from how unsurprised I was to hear them. My father had walked in halfway through and said nothing. When I turned to my mother, hoping she'd say something, anything, she just shook her head and said, "Claire, not now. Don't make this another scene." Another scene. As if I had spent my life disrupting the calm, when really, all I had ever done was try not to drown beneath the surface of their silence. That night, I left and never came back. I packed up the basement apartment, still full of their old Christmas decorations and boxes labeled miscellaneous, and moved out without saying goodbye. I blocked James's number. I stopped answering my parents' calls. I never responded to the 2 half-hearted voicemails my mother left in the weeks that followed, both of which began with, "I know you're upset, but," and ended without a single acknowledgement of what had been said to me. I cut the thread, and I didn't look back. The years that followed weren't glamorous or triumphant, but they were mine. I met Eric at a community fundraiser for small businesses. He was kind in a way I didn't fully understand at first, steady, deliberate, with a gentle sort of curiosity that made me feel like I was worth knowing, not just tolerating. He didn't flinch when I told him about my family, nor did he try to fix it. He just listened and let me exist without trying to shrink me. We got married 2 years later, in a courthouse ceremony with just a few close friends. No white dress, no drama, no invitations to relatives who wouldn't have shown up anyway. We bought a small 2-bedroom bungalow with a creaky porch swing and a yard that desperately needed love. And we gave it that love slowly, weekend by weekend, painting rooms and planting flowers and building a new kind of life from the ruins of what I'd left behind. With his encouragement, I started a small consulting business for local contractors and vendors, budget planning, licensing paperwork, compliance management. It wasn't glamorous, but it was meaningful. And slowly, painfully, I started to believe that maybe I hadn't wasted my life after all. For nearly 7 years, I heard nothing from my family. Until the call came. It was Beth. Her voice was tight and unfamiliar when she said, "Claire, Mom's gone." I was standing in our kitchen, chopping onions. I remember the moment vividly, not for what she said, but for the way everything in me just stopped. My hands, my breath, even my heartbeat seemed to pause for one terrible second before picking up again, slower, heavier. A heart attack. Sudden. Quick. Unexpected, even though her health had been declining for years. Beth paused after giving the details, then added softly, "You don't have to come. I just thought you'd want to know. I don't know if I wanted to go. But I went." The funeral was held at St. Matthew's, the same church where we'd attended Christmas services for decades. The same church where I'd once drawn doodles in the margins of the hymn book because no one ever noticed if I was bored. The same church where, as a child, I had stared at stained glass windows wondering if heaven had a separate wing for girls like me, the forgotten ones. The sanctuary was full of people. James, of course, was front and center, polished and solemn in a tailored black suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage. Lily stood beside him, one hand on his arm, her expression unreadable. I sat toward the back, unnoticed, unacknowledged, a ghost haunting my own family's past. When James stepped up to the podium to give the eulogy, I braced myself. He didn't disappoint. "My mother was a woman of deep strength," he said, voice perfectly modulated, grief measured out in exact portions. "She raised 4 children, but she also raised something else. She raised a real man. A man who could take care of everything, just like she did." A few people chuckled gently. Others nodded. No one looked back at me. After the service, as people milled around with casseroles and condolences, James approached me with a smile that was pure strategy. He handed me a white envelope. "Mom left something for you," he said, his tone syrupy and patronizing. "Just a little help to get back on your feet." Inside was a check for $5,000. A note paperclipped to it read, in his handwriting, "We hope this helps. Wishing you all the best, James." There was no mention of a will. No invitation to discuss the estate. Just this, an insult wrapped in a condolence. I didn't cry. Not then. But I didn't cash the check either. Instead, I asked for a copy of the will. James's face changed instantly. "It's all been handled," he said, eyes hardening. "You were gone, Claire. You chose that." I contacted Beth. I didn't expect her to help, not after all the years of silence. But to my surprise, she agreed to meet. Over coffee in a neutral cafe, she whispered, "I didn't know everything until recently. I'm sorry." With her help, I hired a lawyer. What we found made my blood run cold. The house, the business, the trust fund, everything had been legally transferred to James over the course of several years, quietly, strategically. All paperwork signed by my mother during a period when her cognitive faculties had been declining. There were doctor's notes referencing early confusion, misplaced medications, forgotten appointments. And in the middle of all that, she had somehow voluntarily rewritten the family trust to name James as the sole beneficiary. When I confronted Lily, she was unapologetic. "It made sense," she said with a shrug. "James was the only one who stayed. The rest of us? We were just collateral. Collateral. Not forgotten. Deleted." That night, I sat on our porch swing, the check still uncashed on the table beside me. Eric brought me tea, sat down without speaking, and waited. "I don't think I'm sad," I said finally. "I think I'm just erased." He nodded. "You're not. But I was. Not in the spiritual sense. Not in the ways that mattered to him, or to the clients who valued my work, or to the friends who'd helped me rebuild. But to them, to the people who were supposed to remember, I had been methodically removed like I was a stain they didn't want on the family photo." Now came the choice. Do I sue? Do I drag every document into the light? Do I expose James for the manipulative fraud he is, for what he took, for what he destroyed? Or do I walk away, finally and completely, and refuse to spend one more ounce of my life trying to reclaim a place that never truly existed? As I sat there, weighing both futures, I looked down at the check. I didn't tear it up. But I didn't deposit it either. Because my justice wasn't going to come in quiet settlements or whispered apologies. My justice was still coming. And this time, they were going to see me. The decision not to sue wasn't born from mercy, or some noble sense of closure. It was born from exhaustion so complete it sat inside my bones like winter. I had nothing left to prove to them, not because they believed me, but because I had finally stopped believing they ever would. At first, I thought I would simply move on again, pack the betrayal in a quiet corner of my memory, seal it shut, and return to the life I'd carefully built. But even when I tried to move forward, I found my hands trembling in the middle of the day for no reason. I would stand in the kitchen and forget what I was doing, my chest tightening with something that had no name. The weight of everything unspoken was suffocating. Silence had always been the curse in our house, and now it had followed me out. So, I wrote. Not a diary, not a private journal, but something with structure, intention, and teeth. I wrote in the same methodical way I used to process invoices and balance budgets, carefully, deliberately, with an eye for detail and an appetite for precision. I didn't name names. I didn't have to. I changed dates, scrambled locations, and blurred identifying details, but I didn't soften the truth. Page by page, I unspooled my memories like thread from an old wound, the treehouse with James's name etched into the boards, the rusted bicycle with the frayed hand-me-down ribbon, the overheard sentence that sliced through my childhood like a knife. I wrote about the envelopes with our names, the check with the fake sympathy, the house bought with shared money, the family trust manipulated under the shadow of illness. I wrote about how it felt to be erased without malice, just steady, quiet neglect wrapped in polite phrases and empty glances. I called the manuscript The Quiet Sister. I used a pseudonym, Clara Hall, and self-published through a modest indie platform, mostly because I didn't expect anything to come from it. It felt like exorcism more than expression, like finally screaming into the void even if no one answered. But someone did. Then 100 more. Then thousands. The book found its way onto a message board for adult children of narcissistic families. From there, it was picked up by a TikTok therapist who read aloud a passage from Chapter 5, the moment I stood in the hallway and overheard my father say I was just a filler. Her voice cracked as she read it, and then the comments flooded in like rain on dry ground. This chapter felt like someone transcribed my entire childhood. I've never cried so hard over a stranger's story. I thought I was the only one invisible in my own house. It didn't become a bestseller. There was no book tour, no interviews on morning shows. But in a certain corner of the internet, on late-night Reddit threads and anonymous podcasts and YouTube essays, it became something else. It became real. Someone sent a copy to Beth. She called me a week later, her voice fragile but clear. I knew what they did was wrong, she said. But I didn't realize how deep it went until I saw it outside our family. On the page, it's undeniable. I didn't cry. Not then. But I held that call in my heart like a shard of something beautiful and broken. For the first time, I felt seen by someone who had watched it all happen and finally understood. 2 months after the book went semi-viral, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. But something told me to pick up. "Is this Claire Hollowell?" a clipped voice asked. "This is Investigator Greaves from the State Commerce Division. We'd like to speak to you about James Hollowell's management of Hollowell Contracting Services." It took me a moment to speak. "Why?" I finally asked, my voice hoarse. "We've received multiple complaints and anonymous documents suggesting years of underreported income, irregular disbursements from trust assets, and tax discrepancies connected to payroll practices." My knees went weak. I sat down, pressing my hand to my mouth. The quiet records I had kept all those years, the emails I forwarded to myself, the spreadsheets I had saved, the notes in the folder I'd labeled things they'll deny later. They were finally being examined not as personal grievances but as evidence. I agreed to speak. 3 weeks later, I sat in a sterile government office with beige walls and buzzing fluorescent lights, recounting details I had thought no one would ever care to hear. They asked about business licenses, check routing, tax filings, employment classifications. I answered every question like I had waited a lifetime for it. Because I had. Beth came forward, too. She gave a public statement confirming that James had manipulated our mother during her illness, consolidating assets and rewriting documents while ensuring that none of the rest of us were informed. She admitted she'd been afraid, unsure, but reading the book had given her clarity she hadn't known she needed. She didn't apologize for everything, not directly, but she didn't need to. Her choice to stand up now meant more than any retroactive regret. Lily remained silent. She issued no statement, returned no messages, offered no defense. But her absence spoke volumes, louder than any denial ever could. She had chosen her side long ago, and no revelation would undo that. When I was called to testify during a civil proceeding regarding James's financial misconduct, I wore the simplest dress I owned. I sat on the witness stand with my back straight, my voice calm, and my hands steady. I told the truth, not with venom, not with vengeance, but with the precision of someone who had lived it and no longer felt the need to apologize for surviving. James didn't look at me once. He sat with his lawyer, jaw clenched, eyes fixed on the table, as if refusing to acknowledge that the person he once called a burden was now the reason his empire was unraveling. After the hearing, I didn't linger. There were no dramatic speeches, no family blowouts in the hallway. I signed a few documents, thanked the attorney, and walked into the sunshine feeling like I had finally opened a window that had been shut since I was 9 years old. A few months later, I heard through Beth that the house, the one we grew up in, had been foreclosed. The business had been frozen pending investigation. Financial mismanagement, legal violations, trust abuse. The house was left behind in the shuffle, too riddled with liens and unpaid taxes for James to keep. I didn't celebrate. There was no victory in watching someone self-destruct, not even someone who had tried to erase me. But I went to see it. Not for closure, not for nostalgia, just to look it in the eye one last time. The house looked smaller than I remembered. The shutters were falling off. The porch steps sagged inward. The treehouse was gone, replaced by an overgrown stump and weeds that wrapped around the yard like they were reclaiming the soil. I walked up the driveway quietly, my breath shallow. In my hand, I carried a photo, one of the few that had survived the years, tucked into a box I almost threw away once. It was old and faded, with curling edges. The four of us, standing in front of the treehouse. James with a crooked grin. Lily looking off to the side. Beth clutching a popsicle. Me, standing a little apart, arms crossed, watching the camera like I already knew I didn't belong in the frame. I folded the photo once, gently, and slipped it into the old rusted mailbox. Not as a message to them, but as a marker for myself. This was where it ended. Not in a courtroom. Not in an apology. Not even in justice. But here, on a forgotten porch of a house that had once held all my unanswered questions, I left behind the last one.